If John was beaten up and attacked in that house, who did it?
Just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know.
Okay, you're aware he was beaten up by Brian and Kaen Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right? My tail light was cracked and John was pulverized.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. And it's not for us to know. Somebody other than Kaen is responsible for that, for the killing of John.
Heartbreak echoes, a lonely cry in the cold hard light. Guitar soars through the stormy skies, a melody that pierces the eyes. Love's a memory, a distant dream. In this world it seems fingers glide in the fading light. A final note, a last good night. Lost in the shadows, lost in time. Dreams are all we find. Oh, dreams whisper, oh, dreams sigh. In the darkness they take flight. Heartbreak echoes, a lonely cry in the cold hard light.
In the shadows where whispers dwell,
1.3.
it's like guitar sings of love's farewell.
10-4, I just wanted to know if
Echoes of the heart once bold, now lost in the night's cold fold.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that
Secrets hidden
property case, and I'll be 76
deep
of the Williams Road address.
tales of love that couldn't win, promises made in moonlight's glow, now broken like a shattered show. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Memories of laughter and tears, in the silence they appear, whispers of a time so true, when love was all we knew. Lost in the echoes of the past, wishing for what we had. In the dark we search for light, holding on to what we fight. Through the pain, through the night, we find strength in the fight. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today.
21.
Give me a card for a parking problem.
Foreigner 23. Yeah, that's 428 from Hunt truck when you're ready.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Emotions are raw, very understandably, especially for people that understand that justice was not served and that understand that people that have had no ethics, no integrity, no honor in the way they've covered this case, have grifted on it, have been rewarded. That's just the truth. There's no way to really skip out on that. That's not being a poor loser at all. My life goes on. It doesn't matter. But there's no question that people in the media, such as Howie Carr, social media, we don't need to mention their names, have been rewarded for not seeking the truth on this case. And it's disturbing. Now, I want to play a clip from you, something. It'll be just shortly. Bear with me because this is going to be Alan Jackson. But it's important for people that's on the other side to see, such as, and some of them do come in this channel here. So just let me play this for a moment.
The law provides proof beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty. That means at the end of this case, at the end of the trial, you think about one or more of the charges, you think, you know what, maybe that's true. It might be true. Then you vote not guilty. If you think it's possibly true or probably true, your vote must be not guilty. If someone among you thinks it's likely true or even very likely to be true, your vote is not guilty.
This is something that people on the other side, even though their lawyer said it, the guy that they're rooting for, do not understand. So I get a message, an email from someone who has been messaging me semi-politely from the other side. They'll say something that's kind of aggressive, but then they'll say, oh, I hope you're feeling better. So I guess they think that that couches it. And so the message they sent yesterday is, am I going to apologize for insulting Kaen Reed for 2 years? Well, the answer is Alan Jackson just said that even if you believe, if you're as a juror, even if the jurors believe that Kaen Reed is very likely guilty of this crime, that you have to vote to acquit. So these people are confused into thinking that yesterday's vote somehow exonerates Kaen Reed or proves that someone else killed John O'Keefe. No, 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 no. Listen to Alan Jackson. You don't want to listen to me, that's fine. Listen to Alan Jackson, all right? Alan Jackson just explained that you have to, if you're on a jury, you have to acquit unless you believe beyond a reasonable doubt, all right? So there's going to be a lot of postmortems on this case. But in no way should anybody think that this proved that Kaen didn't do the crime. Now, the jury did not have access to the level of evidence that we have and the time to look at it that we have for 2 years. So they don't have those advantages. Now, what they do have, obviously very likely, is many of them came onto this trial with some preconceived feelings about it that would have come from, unfortunately, a very slanted social media atmosphere that has infected people all around them. So even if they themselves didn't pay attention to the media or the social media, but they're surrounded by family and friends that do, that's going to influence them. But again, this in no way shows that Kaen didn't do it. Those of us that have access to all of the evidence and have been looking at it objectively, that's the important thing, objectively, for all this time, we know there's more than enough. There's a mountain there. That evidence was presented at trial. So, you know, the idea that somehow this exonerates Kaen and she's going to go on this victory tour, you know, that's crazy. Anybody that's going to look at this evidence objectively that was presented in this case, in this trial too, but it's a lot to ask a jury to absorb it. All right. So if I'm the prosecutor right now, I'm like Tom Brady. Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls. He lost 2. And what are the ones that he remembers the most? The 2 that he lost. So I'm sure it's a very difficult day for the prosecution where they're sitting there going over in their minds how they could have played it different. You know what? And there's a lot of things that when you go into a trial, you're making these decisions. So, for instance, they had initially planned to do a rebuttal case in which they would have presented evidence, for example, that there was no canine DNA found on John's clothing. But they made the decision after the defense rested that the jury had had enough and that might be counterproductive. That's a decision that they made. Would it have changed if they did something different? I'm not saying it would have, but I'm sure they're asking those kind of questions right now. And I understand that. So there's a lot we can look at here in this. You know, it's unfair to the prosecution for someone like me or us to be second guessing. But what we've been doing on this case is objective analysis since day one. That's what I've been attempting to do. So if someone wants to say you're not a trial lawyer, you're not qualified, okay, then that's fine. But YouTube is a free land and I'm free to do it. And people can pay attention to it or not. And one thing, now the prosecution here, Hank Brennan had a disadvantage compared to, say, like me or Kate, and that he was brought in very late. He didn't know anything about the case. So he had a lot to absorb and a lot to learn compared to people like some of us who've been knee deep in it for a long time and knew every aspect of the case. Now, I'm not saying that that led to any problems. I'm not saying that at all. Now, what are some of the issues here? One of the issues, now some of these issues have absolutely, excuse me a second. Little chip. Some of these issues, and they could have been the decisive ones that proved victorious for the defense, have nothing to do with the prosecution. So, for instance, the jury pool contamination had nothing to do with the prosecution. There's very little that really nothing the prosecution could have done about that. And it's infected such a large percentage of the country and the world at this point. So that's just the reality of it. Another thing that we have to remember is now the prosecution had the benefit of getting some new evidence that was really decisive here from Ian Whiffen, particularly, and a little bit from Burgess. And we'll talk about it afterwards. I think Welcher might have been the failing of this case, but they had that advantage. But the defense had advantage too. It's not like they weren't going to use that time. Now, one way they would use that time is to have the witnesses that appeared for them in the first trial to sharpen up their arguments. Dr. Murray Russell certainly did that. Another thing that they were going to do is have a chance to find more witnesses, whether that's someone that was just free Karen Reed or experts that wanted to jump on the case because they might make a name for themselves, which would help them make a lot of money. You know, there's a lot of things that it's not just that the prosecution had advantages. The prosecution was going to make a stronger case, but the defense was going to do that too. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. That was just my dad. He didn't realize I was on the air. So I wanted to make sure there was not an emergency. And there is not. Okay. Forget where I was. I apologize. I think we were talking about the experts, right? I don't know. I apologize. The phone call threw me off. And so I just don't remember what I was talking about. So the experts here, if you're going to come out, now I know this, now this applies to experts on both sides. All right. Which really, and a lot of this case came down to the battle of the experts, right? In terms of talking about accident reconstruction theory, medical exams, and all that stuff. If you are in the business of testifying, that's your main job. Like that's a line of work for you. And a lot of people are, right? And if you just went out on one of the biggest cases in some ways in history, because we now have access to media in a way that is pretty new because of social media. So you go on this thing where not only is the news seeing your performance on the trial over and over again, but clips are being presented in social media over and over again. So if you go on as an expert and testify for either side, you've just upped your business multiple times. If you've done a good, so pretty much several of these experts are now going to be in great demand. I have no doubt that the ARCA guys will be in great demand by people that want them to testify. Even more demand because of the fact they were so willing to fudge things for their client. But Dr. Welcher's going to be in great demand. Here's a guy that's comfortable on the stand, was very aggressive on the stand. There's going to be a lot of lawyers that are looking for that in their cases. Burgess was very effective on the stand for the prosecution. I don't know about Dr. Marie Russell because of her age, but she was effective. But it was, she's testifying about dog wounds. I don't think there's probably going to be another case that comes up like that. Dr. Lalapalooza, she's effective too, but she's someone that is a professional testifier. This is what she does for work. So for these people to go on there, if they're willing to sell their testimony, they're going to benefit tremendously for it. So this is the American trial system. It's the way it is. O.J. Simpson, his team brought in multiple high-priced experts that were willing to, it seemed qualified on the surface of it, but that clearly were fudging their opinion. They hadn't even, one case they brought in a very experienced former police officer that didn't even look at the evidence. And he came in for like $40,000 or whatever it was and testified that it was the sloppiest investigation that he'd ever seen. Something to that effect. And so this is a problem with the trial system. And it's a problem for the defense team that's not completely out of their control, but to a degree out of their control. So when the defense is able to find this Dr. Lalapalooza out of the middle of nowhere because she's a professional testifier, and she's qualified because she was the former chief medical examiner for the state of Rhode Island, and she comes on and she's testified at a lot of trials, so she's comfortable up there on the stand. She's willing to get right in your face. She got right in Hank Brennan's face during cross-examination. It's a challenge to overcome that. And if she's willing to get up there and say, these are my qualifications, and that man was not hit by a vehicle, it's very hard to overcome that. Same thing with the ARCA guys. So there are different things that can cause these experts to become compromised on either side. One thing is they just want to get a payday, and they want to help a client, and they know they're going to get a lot of business in the future out of that from other clients. That's one thing. In the case of the ARCA guys, they clearly, to me, I've said this since day one, were corrupted by the feds. For some reason, the U.S. Attorney's Office last year, before the first trial, was weighing in. They had their thumbs on the scale of justice for Karen Read. Now, we know this indisputably because they were violating, I would say, the law, but they were causing the ARCA guys to violate the rules of the court by breaking sequestration order, which they were not allowed to look at testimony of other witnesses in the case or discuss it. And here we have now the U.S. Attorney's Office was very well aware of that. Yet here they are calling up Dr. Wolf during the trial and telling them what the experts of the state testified on. That tells us everything you need to know about the U.S. Attorney's Office at that time. Now, hopefully, it's improved now. You have a new U.S. attorney there. However, the people that were working under Josh Levy, they're still there. They're still in their positions. So the new U.S. attorney has to fight against this. I can only imagine the politics of that office right now and what's going on. So, yeah, someone is saying the feds are not subject to state court orders. That seems reasonable to me. I don't really know, but there's certainly, so they may not be subject to prosecution, those U.S. attorneys, for doing that, but clearly, because they interfered in a state murder case, if there was an inspector general or if there is an inspector general investigation, an honest one, they're going to be accused of wrongdoing by the federal government, by the Department of Justice. Only time will tell for that. And clearly, but that's what happened here. The U.S. Attorney's Office had indicated you can do this in very subtle ways, but there's no question that the ARCA guys understood that the U.S. Attorney's Office wanted to get Kaen off. And we don't know why. And it may have just been to cover for the embarrassment for their improper behavior during the trial. But yet this is why they always, the old expression that begins probably with Watergate, that the cover up is worse than the crime. And what that means is, in order to engage in keep the cover up going, you start breaking more laws, and you have to keep going and going to keep that, to try in order to cover up the wrongdoing that you did before. So this seems to have been probably what happened with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They wanted to keep this hidden under the rug. And the only way to do that was to make sure Kaen got off. And so they continued trying to help her out. And they did a lot more than just that. But that's the one thing that we know for certain. There was a clear violation, certainly of ethics, if not of Department of Justice rules. But we also know they were communicating directly with Karen's team. The U.S. Attorney himself, Josh Levy, was doing that. He was putting up Turtle Boy's blog when he questioned the witnesses in the federal grand jury. He was using Turtle Boy's blog as a display. There's all kinds of evidence that the relationship that developed there was highly improper and ethically, morally wrong. There's no question of that. So once the ARCA guys were given this understanding that your job is to help the defense, that's what they did. And even after they were no longer directly under the control of the feds, they're going to continue doing that, because that's human nature. Once people join a side, they tend to stick to that side. So what we want to do is just look at this stuff objectively. So it doesn't mean that those experts should not be listened to. It's up to the jurors, to each individual juror, to decide as they listen to an expert, is this expert truly telling you the truth, or are they just more or less giving you an opinion to help their side? Because both sides could do that, right? You could make the same accusation against Dr. Welcher that you could against ARCA. And it's up to the jury to decide. And you have to also look at the arguments that these experts make, and as a juror, decide which makes the most sense. So there's a lot of responsibility on the jurors. And and now that more and more experts are needed in these cases, that responsibility just gets harder and harder. So until we know otherwise, the best approach is to just thank the jurors for this service. I do think that it's legitimate. I don't know if we can do this in the public. Is this something, does the legislature have to look at this? Does there have to be an investigation by the court system? But how jurors are selected might potentially be a problem here, especially in high profile cases like this. Is it really the best approach here? Like, you want to get a jury of your peers. And I think a jury of your peers would mean it's random, right? You're going to have someone that might be a doctor on the jury, someone that might be the mailman, someone that might be an auto mechanic, someone that might be a dentist, a lawyer. You should have a balanced mix. But when you have a mob out there that is stirred up and is going to destroy anybody that doesn't vote the right way on that jury, how many people that get summoned to that jury duty want to be on that jury? A lot of people that have a profession and have a lot of responsibilities in life probably want to find a way out of it. And so now you're not getting a balanced jury. You're getting a jury that maybe skews towards the sides of people that have nothing else to do in their life. Look, I was like that too. When I was in college, my first time I got summoned for jury duty, it happened to be during Christmas break. Now, I went to school in Worcester, and so I lived in a dorm there. But I was like, great, I got something to do during break, and it might even allow me to, if the trial goes beyond 3 days, I might even be able to make a little bit of cash. So during that school break, I had nothing to do. But someone else that get calls up that might for instance own a business, they might say, they might find some excuse to get off that trial. So does that create problems here? Is this something that, I don't know how you look into it, but even the way the jury system is now, where each side gets X amount of peremptory exclusions, where they get, say, 9 or 10 or 12. I think it varies depending on the trial. They get to look at someone and without any explanation say, I don't want that person on the jury. So Kaen got to do that. But in theory, both sides get to do that. But they've skewed the laws. It's changed now. It used to be you could use that on anybody. You can still do that on a white male. If a white male, if one side looks at me as a juror, as a potential juror, if I'm walking up there, they look at me and they say, you know what? I don't think he's going to vote our way, so he's gone. You don't have to give a reason, just to say, nope, that guy's off. But that doesn't apply if I'm a black male. And it doesn't apply if I'm a woman. If you're a minority, a woman, it triggers a series of questions. Is that to the advantage of one side or the other? Well, yeah, obviously, I would say probably. Is that something that needs to be examined? Let me just have a sip of coffee. Now, the overall thing that I want to say is I think it's important to have both the emotional reaction that many of us are having, right? Because we know about the injustice that's going on. That emotional reaction is completely legitimate and good. At the same time, and there should be no reason we can't carry these things at the same time. At the same time, we can also step out of that emotional reaction, step away from it inside your head, and have an objective analysis. Now, if you need more time before you can do that, that's understandable. Okay. I've always been someone that could separate those two things. I can be emotional and objective at the same time. Maybe that's one of the only skills I have in life. I certainly can't dance or sing or play a musical instrument. But I can do that. And so, as I try to analyze this here, what you do is wait for more information that comes in. So we're getting a little bit of information from one of the jurors who has spoken out on TMZ. And it's worth listening to that. But you have to listen to more than that. Let me, sorry, I forgot to change the chat. When you set up a show, you actually have to, in order to get some of the trolls out, you have to change it to subscribers only. All right, so I just did that. So we're going to get a few less trolls here now. So at least if you're going to troll, you have to become a subscriber. So everybody was congratulating me last night or during the show yesterday because we topped 10,000 subscribers. And even though the show generally picks up new subscribers overnight, even if we don't do a show, over last night and today, I lost about 30 or 40 subscribers. And I have no idea where that loss came from, but I doubt it came from free Kaen Reed people. So those were probably anti-Kaen Reed people that don't think my anti-Kaen message is strong enough for their taste. So they're a little angry and they decided to leave me. Okay, I can live with that. I think it's important to try to never give up your objectivity when you're looking at analysis. It's understandable when you develop connections to one side and you feel those emotions. You feel for them. You feel for John's family, first of all. You feel for the witnesses that have been falsely accused and hounded here and were hounded again last night. And this hounding is going to go on for some time. You feel for just overall the yuckiness that comes with knowing that such a scumbag like Turtle Boy is going to be out there celebrating this, and absolute cowards like people like Mike Crawford and the Glairer and Brandy Churchwell, and all these people out there who never asked an honest question. They totally grifted on this because they knew where the numbers were. They're not rewarded. And so it's unfortunate, right? Howie Carr, any media that just chased this down dishonestly. It's a tough thing to swallow. And so it's understandable if people get emotional about that, but you can't give up your objectivity. And I think that there are aspects of the jury system that have to be looked at, like I just talked about. But at the end of the day, I think the system still works. Hey, the dude Abide is still here. I haven't seen the dude for a while. I was just thinking about you the other day, dude. The dude says his thoughts are with the O'Keefe family, friends, and innocent victims. May you somehow find peace amidst the storm. And that's how we all feel about this. And thank you, dude. Yesterday, Court TV reached out to me last night to see if anybody from John's family was willing to go on Friday night or go with them on the show. And I said, look, I never have tried to suggest to them that I'm close to the family or have contacts within the family. They say that sometimes on the show. Vinny did the other night, and I kind of squirm a little bit because I've never told them that I do. I never do. Never did. My only connections to the family are like cousins, second cousins, and that kind of thing. I do have connections to John Jackson, who we had on the show yesterday. He called in with Brendan Kaen. Poignantly, they found out while they were on the show with us that there'd been a verdict and the family was being summoned. They were with the family, but they were outside in the parking lot in order to talk to us. So that was an emotional moment. And they're really good guys. So I actually reached out to John to see if they wanted to go on Court TV with Vinny's show tomorrow. And they're not fans of Vinny because they feel that Vinny has covered this in a very unobjective way. But I owed it to him to reach out to them on that. And, they decided to do it very much like they decided to take the fight out to the public after the first trial. Before the first trial, they trusted in the system. After the first trial, they're like, you can't. Now the trial is over. We have double jeopardy in this country, so no matter what happens, there's not going to be another trial. Kaen has been acquitted of this. An example, even if you found out, for example, that Kaen bribed a juror, it wouldn't matter. And that's happened before. In the second John Gotti trial in the 1980s, Sammy Guarano managed to bribe one of the jurors. And that juror, eventually they found that out, and that juror was, I think, served a year in jail because of that, year in prison. But John Gotti didn't get a new trial. John Gotti was acquitted on that trial. So that's Kaen is free, and that's it. It's not fair, but it is what it is. Now, looking at the remarks of the juror that was on TMZ, and he's talking about the taillight pick. These were things that I wanted to focus on. I wish, I can't say this because it's going to sound, but I just wish, I can't say it, but I'm not a lawyer, but there were things that maybe I understood a little bit just because I'd been so far in the weeds for so long on this case, but also somewhat on both sides because I started out on the other side. I think it gave me a different perspective on what was important to a jury. And I think I've also just logically figured out something that it seems that many lawyers, even though as brilliant as they are, don't seem to understand. That if you get 12 people in a room and ask them to decide anything, if you get 12 people into a room that know each other, and if you get them into a room and say, you guys got to decide where you want to go on vacation. We're going to give you all money to go on a free vacation. Now you got to decide where you're going to go. they're going to have a hard time making the decision because two people can't decide on something. With 3 people, it's almost impossible. With 12, it's impossible. So, to get 12 jurors to come up with a unanimous decision, what that told me, and I reported this after the first trial, and the jurors, if you go back to the first interview that Ronnie did with Turtle Boy, where it was he wasn't on the air, Turtle Boy just recorded it and then put it out on his blog. I think that interview was pretty accurate at how that jury deliberated. I think he did a good job with that. I think Ronnie gave excellent insights. And when I talked to Kevin Mahoney about it at the time, he felt the same way. This jury, no jury was ever going to consider things that were too open to interpretation, that they couldn't be sure about. So I really felt that things like even the clips from the videos, I didn't say not to play them, but they were not going to be a heavy factor with the jury because they weren't going to know exactly what those things meant, and they were going to be open to different interpretations. So what a jury's going to do is really stick to the stuff that all 12 of them can accept. So, for example, if they could accept that Kaen was drunk while driving. Now, I don't know. It sounds like this alternate or dismiss. I don't know if it was an alternate juror. It was an alternate juror that John DePietro talked to. Didn't even seem to accept that. But you'll notice on the thumbnail that I made today, I have the courthouse and I have an army of zombies. Now, I know people get upset with me. They're sick of the zombie thing. But sometimes it to some degree, it captures what's going on here. There really is a percentage of people within this state, or probably in any state, that seems to have de-evolved at some point. You know what I'm saying? I know that sounds terrible to say, but there's something wrong. They're not able to think critically. I don't know. I'm not a weed smoker. I'm not against people that do. I've been a freedom-loving guy, so I didn't mind when they made it free. But I do wonder if people smoke too much weed at a certain age. There's a lot of science that shows that does brain damage. So what is going on with so many people that can't seem to think critically? Are we not supposed to talk about that? Is it politically incorrect to talk about that? I mean, there does seem to be something wrong with a lot of people you talk to, and they're just like, what is wrong with your brain? What happened here? So did some people, I don't know, what exactly is going on there. But I do think that for the most part, the jury system works, and you are going to get a jury of your peers. And in order for them to agree on something, you really have to present them with facts that the majority of them will accept as true. And then they'll start building a case. They'll start stacking them together to build a case. And this is what I argued in my personal mock opening statements back in, I think, March. Keep it simple. Show them that there was no other possibilities except what happened here. Now, I think for the most part, Hank did do that. The only thing you could question was, were there too many other things that were included in that information that became a distraction? And does a jury start talking about things? They've been sitting in a room for 7 weeks, and now you finally free them to talk about the case. The simpler you keep it, they're only going to talk about those simple things. But if there's a lot of other stuff for them to talk about, they are going to talk about those things. And that becomes a distraction that can cause them to forget the simple logic. So if you want to, the simplest logic of this case is that the taillight pieces were reassembled and they matched Kaen's car. Sorry about that. They matched Karen's Lexus. Now, the only way that Kaen didn't strike John, therefore, is if somebody planted that evidence. But then if you go look at the timeline, you look at where Karen's vehicle was, there was no way to plant evidence. That needed to be shown to a jury. And if you show just a few things to the jury like that, you're going to leave no loophole for them to try to get out of that. Now, if you have someone comes on to that jury that is free Karen Reed, and there's no, I don't doubt that at least a couple did, they're going to look at something that the defense shows, and they're going to try to bring that up in the jury room. But if you keep it simple, then there should hopefully be at least 8 or 9 other people, or hopefully 10 or more, that say, no, you know, that stuff doesn't matter. This is the simple aspect of this case. It has a simple logic to it. It's not difficult. Why was it not difficult? Because as it turns out, the Lexus it went briefly into John's garage until 5:08 a.m. And there's no sign, or even the defense has never said somebody broke in to John's garage to tamper with that vehicle. Would have been very difficult. The Ring camera would have seen someone coming through the yard, right? There would have been tracks in the snow. There's no foot tracks in the snow at 5:08 when Karen leaves. So how could somebody have broken into that garage? There was the state police examined the garage too, and there was no evidence of any damage. So how did someone get into that house? Was the niece in on the conspiracy? I mean, this is you start to get into absurdity. Then Karen leaves at 5:08, and she drives out looking for John, and then she goes to the McCabe house. So Karen's in the car. Then Jen McCabe drives the car. Sorry, I just have an itch. Then Karen McCabe drives the car back to John's house, but Karen's in the car. So Karen's in the car the whole time. Could anybody have tampered with the Lexus while Karen's in the car? I don't think anybody believes that, right? Then it's parked in the driveway where it stays all morning. Now, it's under Ring surveillance that entire time. Okay? John's family starts arriving, I think, around 10:30. And Paul shovels out the driveway. Shortly after that, John's niece arrives, and then a little later, the nephew, but also Karen Reed's family arrives. Karen Reed arrives. And after briefly going into the house, they take the vehicle, and the father drives it back to Dighton. Is the idea that somebody could have tampered with it then while they were on the road? Well, again, Karen's in the vehicle, as is her father. Then the vehicle is parked inside the driveway in Dighton, where it's also under video surveillance that both sides have. So up to that point, was there any time that somebody could have tampered with that vehicle? No. It's in, and there's no sign of anybody trudging through the snow to tamper with it in Karen's parents' driveway. Right? Now, the state troopers arrive, I think around 3:30, and there is a Dighton cop there with them, Officer Barrows. He's obviously not part of the conspiracy, right? He's now testified for the defense. So they didn't tamper with it then, right? Then it's towed back to the Sallyport at the Canton police station. It arrives too late for anybody to tamper with it. It's pulled into the garage at 5:36. By that time, the entire CERT team has arrived at the crime scene, and they're shoveling out an area that's a tiny, tiny area. It's the size of 2 parking spaces. They're shoveling shoulder to shoulder. The crime scene is 5-minute drive away from the Sallyport. The Sallyport door doesn't close until 5:41. The main taillight piece, the corner piece, is found by the CERT team at 5:45. It's found at street level. It's found near the curbstone, under 3 feet of snow. So under those, there's a WBC news crew there that's filming. Under those circumstances, there was just no way to bury that corner piece of taillight. There was zero way to do that. And so that really is enough evidence right there that Karen Reed did it. There's other evidence we can get to, powerful stuff. But that evidence right there is more than enough. You have the taillight pieces were reassembled. They perfectly matched Karen's Lexus. And there was no time in the timeline to plant evidence. There's no, it's beyond a reasonable. There's no reasonable way. You can come up with some weird theory that, a helicopter landed or something. I mean, but it's beyond a reasonable doubt that no one could have tampered with the taillight that morning. That's beyond a reasonable doubt. And if people don't accept that, it's really because on that side, this is why I call them zombies. They don't want to. They don't want to look at it. They're too busy going, but what about the butt dials? There's nothing you can really do about people like that because their emotional need to believe in this is too deep. It's at the reptilian level of the brain. So at the analytical level, their thinking doesn't even reach analysis. The part of the brain that does analysis, that weighs things logically, it doesn't even get there because their brain has filtered all that out. The only thing that's left is the simple reptilian emotional reaction to what's going on, to what they want to see, a narrative that for some reason resonates with them and they want to believe it. And there's not much we can do about that. It's very difficult. So that's what we're dealing with here. Now, there are a lot of good people that believe in this because they didn't seek out the information on the other side. They just listen to their favorite podcaster and that doesn't want to tell them the truth. And even when it was obvious that their podcaster is not someone that is committed to the truth, they still kept going with him for whatever reason, him or her. Why didn't they seek out, didn't they recognize that podcaster was not in any way looking at both sides? Now, anybody that watches my channel knows that I always try to look at both sides, even if I've come to a conclusion at some point, which is not, that's the, if a conclusion is possible because of the logic, you want to come to it because of the evidence. You don't want to skip that. Both sides doesn't mean you never draw a conclusion. No. But I'm still going to objectively look at each piece of evidence as it comes in. And I think anybody that watches that channel knows that because most of the people that watch this channel that are anti-Kaen have one time or another got very mad at me. Look, and like I said, I lost 35, 40 subscribers overnight. That's probably people that were mad at me because I wasn't saying what they wanted to hear. And, maybe they'll come back. I don't know. But you want to be always objective and you want your news source. You want people that are giving you the information on a case to be objective. Why wouldn't you want that? I think most of the people here do want that. And that's why they're here. But for other people, there's a lot of self-awareness involved here. You have to look at yourself and say, do I want the truth? And if I want the truth, am I willing to go to sources that just tell me what I already want to hear? Or am I willing to go to sources that'll at least try to give me both sides of something? Unfortunately, too many people on both sides, but certainly people on the FKR side, they really never were interested in the truth. And that's been a huge problem here. There are obviously some people that were just incapable. There's a certain brain dysfunction that they really are incapable of even looking at that. Judy said, YCT is my first podcast. Is this meaning, do you mean, Judy, the first podcast that you ever listened to? I don't actually myself listen to true crime podcasts as a general rule. So I don't know how other true crime channels do it. I've been interviewed on a lot because of the book. And my name is rude. I don't know what that means. I've done a lot of interviews. And so the people that have interviewed me, they have been pretty objective and interested in the truth. So that's good. So I don't know what people want. If I'm looking at, I don't usually talk about this, but I'm only talking about this now for a different context. So I do watch some shows on cancer research. But I don't want to watch a show that is just going to tell me what I want to hear. If you walk barefoot in the park once a day, you'll be grounded to Mother Earth and your cancer will be healed. I really don't want to hear that. What I want to hear is someone that at least has a sense of skepticism. There's a lot of people with home cures out there. And I think some of them could be worth listening to. For instance, I've talked about this a few times on the show, and you guys might be interested in this. So few years back, several years back, maybe 5 years back, I was at a dinner and one of my nieces was at it, and she was a senior in high school. And she mentioned how that it was either that morning or the day before she had just had her wisdom teeth out. And I looked at her and there were no she had no swelling. Sorry, I was looking at chat for a second. There were no swelling in her cheeks. So I said, "Wow, how do you have no swelling?" You know, everybody gets the chipmunk cheeks. I got them as a kid. You know, I iced them every couple hours, trying not to get them, but no, they still blew up when I had the total Alvin the Chipmunk cheeks. And she said, "Pineapple." I said, "Pineapple? What do you mean?" She said, all the kids. I said, "How do you know about that? Did the doctors have it?" No, all the kids were talking about it in social media. So this is something that spread through social media, that if you drink a lot of pineapple, you won't get that swelling. And it turns out there's an enzyme that's in the pineapple that's called bromelain, and you can order it online. And so I started thinking, that's something that does something with inflammation, at least inflammation in your mouth. And so one of the side effects for cancer treatments is very painful mouth sores. And so I said, I wonder if it could work on that. And so I ordered this bromelain, and sure enough, it works miraculously to get rid of mouth sores. Now, other people in my family or friends have problems with mouth sores for different reasons. And I've showed them this cure, and it works on them too. So this was something that I got not from a doctor or even from a website. It was spread through social media of teenagers, and apparently they all know about it. So I guess it's like a TikTok cure, right? But it works. So you can find things in social media, but you have to be really skeptical. You have to really try to apply skepticism. Is this just kind of a crazy thing? Is this something that has any medical science behind it? And so I think it's the same thing when you're looking at a true crime channel that's looking at true crime. Does it feel, or whether I like to watch science channels, does it feel like this host is being objective and trying to look at all the various possibilities, all of the variables? I think it's important to do that. And I think you can sense when your host or the channel host is doing that. And I think you can sense when they're not. Now, I don't see how any person could look at the Turtle Boy or the Glare or Mike Crawford and get a sense, or Brandy Churchwell, and get a sense that they're trying to look at this case objectively from both sides. No. And you can, in 5 minutes, you could look up many of the things that they believe that were debunked in the first trial, and they never reported it. Melanie Little. So if you watch those channels, you should have been like, these people are not seeking the truth. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't watch them, but you really should seek out information from the other side, because you're getting it in an echo chamber. And I used to get this, I called it the free Karen Reed look. These people will go on in FKR blissfully unaware of the evidence, and I would give it to them, and all of a sudden every muscle in their face would die because they'd be shocked. They had never somehow heard those explanations, which is stunning. Now, what they should have done, first of all, is you go and you look it up to see if what I said was true. And then once you confirm it was, because what I tell people is true, then they should look differently at their sources. They should say, why didn't their source correct this stuff? Why is Nick Rocco 2 weeks ago going on Court TV and saying that Trooper Proctor did the swabs on John's clothing for the canine DNA? Why this late in the game is someone that they trust with information being trotted out there by Karen and her team to report something like that? That is just not true and absurd. Really, it's not even how those investigations work. I'm not allowed to drink beer, so another coffee break. If you will excuse me for a moment. We'll take a moment to check chat. So I really hadn't planned to do a show so quick. I wanted to take time off, and one of the people that a lot of people have been messaging me, and some of them saying, we'd like you to go on the air when you can, and, just kind of give us your side of things because we've been with you for a couple years. And so one of them was Anthony, and he was very nice. He said, can you come on when you feel good enough and just give us your side? Now, Anthony has been on this show a couple of times before, and he was very articulate and very nice guy. Everybody that was here really liked him. Some of you guys watching now might remember him. So he had messaged me about 6:45. So I made the show and I sent him an invite, and I said, if you're available, come on around 8:15. But I don't know if he had time to see the message or if he wants to come on. So one of my good friends from this channel is Chick from the Bricks, and I don't know. She emailed me saying that she's in timeout. I don't know what happened, but I would guess it's a mistake. And I was trying yesterday for people that were trolling to try to ban them, and it was so hard because chat is moving so fast. So I'm going to guess that was probably a mistake. It was probably the situation where the chat moved too fast and you accidentally got put in timeout, Chick from the Bricks. So, but I do apologize. Chick from the Bricks is a great friend of the channel who should have been able to help make a vital instrumental difference in this case if only people had listened to us. So one of the reasons that I believe that this case was lost was I believe that Aperture let us down. They let Hank Brennan down. There was no excuse for them putting on, I talked about this a couple of days ago. There was no excuse for them putting on the slideshow that the time of the estimated time of the collision was before. She's here again. Okay, good. Thank you. Chick, I don't know what happened. I'm sorry what happened. It was obviously an accident. So they put on a slideshow that the accident occurred. I'd have to go back and watch it, but it was before Ian Whiffen said John got out of the car. And that doesn't make sense. Now, they did include with that there's a time variance of up to a minute. But it should have been figured out before they put that in a slideshow. And that's a mistake because I figured out, and Chick from the Bricks helped me put together a better graphic to show it, just on the basic Waze data that was provided, not even in the first trial, but before the first trial in official documents put out by the state. They had in the Waze data as compiled by Trooper Garino. And Waze data, is, we learned in this trial why, is very accurate. It's very accurate. Your location data has a certain degree of accuracy. But once the Waze app is activated, that accuracy goes way up, both the location and the times. Because that app is running all kinds of ways to make sure it's accurate, because it needs to be accurate because it's guiding you. It's guiding you in traffic. So we know from that Waze data what time Karen missed a turn onto Fairview. And then we know what time she circled back and made the turn. And so I made a chart that showed, estimated within a couple of seconds, what time the 3-point turn was. And then based on the triggering events, which are 8 minutes and 4 seconds in between each other, we knew roughly what time John was hit. So within a few seconds. And that Waze data was accurate. And I put that together and I made a graphic, but my graphic was ugly because I'm not good at that kind of stuff. And Chick from the Bricks really helped us put that together. Now, I gave that graphic to the Discovery ID people. They chose not to use it. I gave it to Court TV many times. They chose to never use it. And I also made sure that got to the hands of the prosecution. And they either didn't see it or chose not to use it. But if that document had got to Dr. Welcher, I don't think he ever would have put that in the slideshow. And if there had been a third trial, it wouldn't have gone into the slideshow. Mr. Burgess, the witness, when he saw there was that discrepancy, he worked through other means to come up with a different accuracy to it. And he was able to establish the time, really the same exact times that I did, using different means. But they should have had that because the defense was going to try to make hay of that slideshow, and they did. And if Dr. Welcher had just looked at that graphic that Chick from the Bricks helped me make, they never would have made that mistake. And I don't think they should have made that mistake anyways. Too much money was paid. They should have figured out that time variance way before, and not just put it in a slideshow. Well, this is what time we think could happen within a minute. Come on, dude. That's too much money was paid to that company for that. I also thought that, so during the first trial, one of the things that I thought we would see was the prosecution bring in a functioning Lexus taillight hooked up to a battery, and maybe even a way where you could disassemble it a little bit. So you could put it up there on a table and show the jury how it works, how the lights work, how it works when you press the brakes. And this is something that other people connected to this case out in chat here have similar things, have done a lot of work. I know Hillbilly Nitro has done some, but other people too. Let me look in my emails to mention. Let's see if one of them was Jimmy. Yeah, so, oh no, Kenny. I don't know. So Kenny has been saying for a similar amount of time that the brake light would light up red because of the red LEDs, and that this was the main issue. But that only lights up when you hit the brake light. So the defense, apparently, and this was apparently what this juror that spoke to TMZ is pointing at, was able to show that snapshot picture of that Alan Jackson showed in court in both trials. And that meant something to him. Well, if the prosecution had brought in that taillight and as a demo and showed how it works, I think they could have cleared that up. And I wanted that in the first trial, and I wanted it in the second trial, and we didn't get it in either one. And who should have brought that in? Welcher and Aperture. That's what they were hired to do. They weren't hired to just have somebody stand there and rub paint against their arm. They were paid a lot of money. And, I think it's impossible to figure out every aspect of the accident because they don't know, like Welcher said, they don't know all the variables. And so at least they were honest about that. They don't know exactly where John was, how he was standing, what he was moving. And so that was going to create a lot of variables that were impossible to correct. So to truly examine how he was hit and what path he took was probably difficult. But you at least had to offer some alternative theory to the way those wounds were made on the arm. Because I don't think by saying that they were struck by taillight pieces, that was adequate. You had 6 separate pieces of wounds that all were similar and that they each had consisted of 3 parallel tracks. There had to be some way to explain that. And I've seen people in chat explain that. So for instance, if your elbow is bent, one piece that could create 3 tracks could strike you on both parts of the arm, depending on how you were standing and how you were moving. So one little piece of, say, an inner part, say part of the inside the housing there underneath the glass, could in theory have created 2 wounds. But, I believe some plausible way should have been shown to the jury. I don't know, but I think that could have made a difference here. Obviously, Welcher had to be honest with the jury. And if the reality is that some of these things couldn't be determined, he had to be honest about that. But I also thought he was a little bit too confrontational under cross-examination. And this was a bad look. And when the defense experts did it under cross-examination, we didn't like it, right? Well, it was the same thing on that side. So I don't know. I'm sure Dr. Welcher is going to get a lot of new clients anyways, because in a lot of ways he looked effective if you were just looking at a snapshot. But I don't think at the end of the day, he helped out. I think he made Hank Brennan's job a lot harder, if you ask me. And the choice on rebuttal was the prosecution's choice. That was Hank Brennan's choice. He decided they were better off that the jury was. I don't know. Obviously I don't have access to Hank. I haven't talked to him, but I'm guessing that he decided. So, for instance, the judge had said just the day before that the jury was fed up. So if the jury's fed up, was it in your interest to call them back for a couple more days of rebuttal? What's the reaction to that going to be? Would they look at that and take revenge on the defense because of it? Maybe. So I don't know. But I think so look, like I said, Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls, but the 2 that he thinks about the most are the ones that he lost against the Giants. And I'm sure that's how the prosecution is thinking right now, except it wasn't a Super Bowl. It was something that had the weight, so much weight because of the families involved. Not just obviously John O'Keefe's family, but the witnesses that are again being hounded by a bogus media and by cruel and stupid people, frankly, and people that are exploiting it. That's got a weigh on him. So my heart goes out to him too. He did his best, and very often the case that he did was brilliant. The closing arguments were incredibly brilliant. I didn't think anybody would ever be able to make a powerful enough case for second degree, even though technically the second degree case was there by the third prong. I thought it was going to be difficult to convince a jury, but he did such a good job in that closing argument. It seemed like he might even have a chance at that. So very powerful. And from my understanding is the family, if there was a third trial, they would have definitely wanted him back. So the family was very, very happy with him. And I have no sense that anybody, whether with the family or the witnesses, and I've talked to some, were in any way unhappy with his performance. So nobody's blaming the prosecution. And to be fair, they didn't really blame the prosecution the first time either. These people are nice people. They're not turtle riders. They're not cruel. So they don't want to blame people that went to bat for them and worked so hard to try to bring justice. So it's not their inclination to want to blame anybody on the prosecution in either of the trials. So I think there's a lot to look at here. We can look at the jury contamination. Should this trial have been moved to another district in another county in the state that was it certainly at least outside of Norfolk? I think that's a possibility. Should we, in cases like this, high-profile cases, should we look at things like how the jury selection works? Is it fair? Is what's going on fair? Should Turtle Boy obviously Turtle Boy should never have been allowed in that courthouse. I think overall Judge Cannone did a good job, but there's no excuse for that unless her hands were tied in some way by state rules. To let somebody in there that's going to be winking and nodding with the jurors and intimidating them, and even just him being there gives them, look, like I said, how some experts are drawn and some witnesses are drawn to be involved in a case like this because of, like a moth to a flame, the limelight, your 15 minutes of fame, the desire to play a big part in the big case of your lifetime. That's that's a reality in big cases. It's been a reality in every huge case going back to Lizzie Borden and other big cases. And even smaller cases that are big. Let's say 100 years ago, there's an axe murder of a family in a small town. That may not make national news 100 years ago because there wasn't really national news much back then. But that, for the people that live in that town, that's the news of that's the story of their lifetimes. That's the story of that town's history. And it's something that's going to draw a lot of certain types of people, and a large number of them that might want to be involved in it in some way. And so that's the danger of what we're looking at here. And it can affect expert witnesses, but it also can affect regular witnesses. Is this what originally Drew offered Devers to get involved and give that statement to the FBI? I think so. I don't buy into this false memory thing. Something drew her to want to be involved. And then she was later shown evidence that her statement couldn't be true because she wasn't in the Canton police station when the Lexus arrived. So I've been consistent on this because I said this before I was even covering the Karen Reed case, before we were even aware of it, that this is a problem, that you have problem witnesses that are drawn to this, they want to be involved, and they come out. And it's a big issue. I think that's what drew Dr. Marie Russell out. So when I read on this channel an interview with Dr. Marie Russell and a big article on her that was from LA Times in 2021, so 24 years ago. Now, she has no children, but at the time, she was running the ER at a busy hospital in Los Angeles, a job where you're very much in demand. And she had been documenting wounds for a number of years. So she was in demand at universities and in the lecture circuit to talk about these things. And Gia, thank you very much. That's very generous. Oh, I got the wrong one. Oh, I didn't even see all these. Jess, thank you very much. Very unnecessary and too kind. Thank you. I'm not sure when I'll be back. This is taking a toll on me, this case too. Cacophony, thank you. And Gia, thank you very much. She says, thank you for all your coverage of this. I wish you good health. And it's so sad it ended up happening at all. Yeah. So thank you very much, Gia. So the same thing with Dr. Marie Russell. In the article I read from 2021, she's in demand at the time, but she has no kids, no family of her own. And what she says is the only passion she had outside her work was true crime. So she's very much into true crime. Now, she claims last year that she gets involved with the Karen Read case because she sees an article in the Boston Globe. Maybe. Was she monitoring this in social media? And that's where she really found out about it? I don't know. But she reaches out to a friend of Alan Jackson's who works for the LA District Attorneys, another attorney. And that's how she becomes involved in the case. Well, we don't even know, because at one time during the first voir dire before she testified, the Judge Cannone was questioning Alan Jackson on this, and he said, does it matter? So if it turned out that Alan Jackson reached out to her, it didn't matter. But why are they lying about it if that's the case? So, this, whenever you get, as we see, Alan Jackson involved in the case, there's going to be a lot of strange and dishonest stuff. It's just part of it. And we're seeing the same thing with David Yannetti. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. Both of them lied to Gretchen Voss when they said they never talked to Turtle Boy. And then the phone records came out later and they had talked to him frequently. So they have no problem lying to a mainstream journalist. They're not honest people. It is what it is. You can't, I'm not smearing them. They're not honest people. They lied to a mainstream reporter. That's a fact. And that tells you all you need to know about them. They're not even lying to save their lives because they're on the line, because they're up for trial or something like that, or they're being accused of something embarrassing. No, they're lying to a reporter because they went out to a disgusting blogger and they didn't want to admit that later. Mary Jane, again, way too generous and not deserved, but thank you very much, Mary Jane. I appreciate it. And got a secret. Can you keep it? Says, when does TB go to court? And I hope he gets jail time. Well, this is a problem. I don't even think he's going to get a fair trial. This is why the jury selection process needs to be looked at. What lawyer is going to want to take that case up? Because no matter how well you present that case, there are going to be turtle riders on that jury and Free Karen Read people on that jury. And they can't even question those jurors about Free Karen Read. So in this jury, in theory, if you knew something about Free Karen Read, you weren't supposed to serve. But a judge is not on the Turtle Roy case. They're not even going to be allowed to say to a prospective juror, hey, did you follow the Karen Read case? They can't even ask that question. And if they did follow the Karen Read case, they're going to vote to acquit Turtle Boy. So going to be extremely different to get a fair trial. I saw a question quick. Why weren't they sequestered? And if by sequestered, you mean put in a room, that's a huge thing to ask a jury. These people have family, they have kids. To ask them to be sequestered into a hotel for 7 weeks is too much. Can they ask for a change of venue in the Turtle Boy case? I don't know why they didn't in this case. So I don't know the answer to that. But that's a part of this case that so many people on the other side would say, well, I think Karen's innocent, but I don't approve of Turtle Boy's tactics. But then there they are defending Turtle Boy. People I've talked to, even his own, the pit bull, said, I don't approve of everything Aiden does, but she's his pit bull. And she's out there defending him at all things. So it's disturbing. So we've gotten to 8:30. I'm going to check real quick for any important questions, but I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about, but I really only wanted to give this an hour. Hopefully we'll hear more from other jurors, and we've got to be fair to them, and people from both sides should be fair to them and not try to jump into any conclusions. You just have to be careful about that. You notice I never attack Ronnie, the juror who's come out. And I don't know why he's done such a publicity tour, but then again, when I listened to him speak about his perceptions of the first trial, I thought they were honest and helpful, as I've said. So let's be careful in not attacking jurors. Now, if we find out that a juror, for instance, was communicating with Turtle Boy, or a juror lied under oath to get onto that jury, that's different. But we should really, these people had to give up. They had to sacrifice a lot to be on that jury, to do their duty. So I think we need to really be respectful of that and not jump to conclusions, and give them the benefit of the doubt, however they voted. They made that sacrifice. As long as they sat on that jury and did it diligently, we should accept their conclusions and appreciate their work. Charlie says, Kevin, have you read any of the jurors' interviews that have come out? So I saw the one on TMZ, clips with it. That's the only one I've seen. I did see a little bit of an alternate juror that talked to John DePetro. Of course, the problem with the alternate juror is that alternate juror really doesn't have any more information than we do, because they were removed. They did not have access to the deliberations. So they don't know what went on in that room. They have an opinion on the trial just like the rest of us, and really nothing more than that. Someone saying, what's next for Yellow Cottage Tales? I tried to click on it, but it moved too quick, but I did see it. The short messages are easier for me to see. I can't get back to it. Karma Cunt, obviously you're a total writer. She says, Kevin, please go take care of your health and leave what you don't know up to professionals. I will stand up to any of the professionals that I've seen talk about this case on the news. And if you don't like that, I don't care, because I've given analysis that I feel quite comfortable saying has been better than most of the lawyers I've seen on TV or have been on TV with. I've given analysis that has been, now there occasionally things come up with the law that I don't understand. And so that's great when you have someone around to explain that. But in terms of weighing this evidence, yeah, I'll stand my analysis up to any of those people, every single one of them. So if you want to be Karma Cunt, and that's her name, so don't accuse me of using the C word, and she has it with a K. No. And people that say that take care of your health generally be turtle riders or free Karen Reed people that are talking out both sides of the mouth. They come out with an insult and they say, oh, take care of your health. But what they're trying to do is silence debate, even though the trial is over. So what's the point, right? But they've been trying to silence me for almost a couple of years now, because they consider me a threat, because I am explaining to you exactly why Karen did this. And if you don't understand that, it's because you can't weigh evidence. And maybe you're a part of the zombie crowd that's out there. And so I'm sorry. That's now for people on the jury that are saying, well, again, I want to go back to the clip I played at the beginning with Alan Jackson. He told the jury in his closing arguments, even if you think Karen Reed is very likely to have done this crime, you have to vote to acquit. because that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So the zombie crowd doesn't understand this. And that's what it is. So Channel 5 is in the courtroom, and the defendant watches Channel 5 every morning and evening. Should Channel 5 mainstream media not be allowed in court? Turtle Boy should not be allowed in court because he has threatened the jurors multiple times. Do you not understand this? Obviously, you're a fan of his. He's done it on his show repeatedly. He has doxed the name and business of the foreman of the last trial. All right? He's made clear before each one of these trials that if any juror doesn't vote his way, he's going to try to destroy them. He's made this clear over and over and over again. All right? He's harassed the witnesses mercilessly. That is why he should not be allowed in the court. He's not a journalist. He is not a journalist. All right? And I don't say that. I don't look this. I have room in my world for all kinds of journalists. You can have a point of view and still be a journalist. You can be, if you're covering politics, you can be Republican, you can be Democrat, you can be liberal, you can be conservative, and you're still a journalist. But if you're out there covering a criminal trial and you're trying to change the results by intimidating jurors, no, you're not a journalist. Nobody from Channel 5 did that. Nobody does that but Turtle Boy. And if you don't understand that, then you're an idiot. And I don't, I'm not being mad saying that. I can say it with a smile. I can perfectly well sit back, drink my coffee, wish it was a beer, and say with a full smile that you are a moron. Okay? Now, it must be hard to go through life being a moron. So I guess you do have my sympathy. Maybe you were dropped on your head. Maybe you ate lead paint when you were a kid. Those are terrible things, right? Maybe you suffered some trauma. But that what you just said is stupid. I got a beep on my phone, so it's probably somebody mad at me. People get mad sometimes if I sound grumpy. No, it wasn't that. But there are some things that are just stupid. This guy outed the juror in the Chesney case, who was Judge Cannone handled. He outed the juror in the first Chesney trial that voted to acquit. Now that I'm not defending that juror, but if in that case the evidence was overwhelming too. But Turtle Boy has been outing jurors, threatening jurors all along, and yet they're not going to remove him from court. If there's any chance that Turtle Boy can signal to a juror, he's going to. And those jurors, it's not just about intimidation. Those jurors are going to see Turtle Boy, and many of them are going to understand that after the trial, he can make them a star. He can give them their 15 minutes of fame, where they get to go on there and appeal to that mob to be positive. Thank you, Eileen. I appreciate it. So again, as we're getting close to concluding this today, and I'll do a show again soon. Don't worry. There's been some interesting things going on in the background relevant to this case that I will be able to tell you about hopefully soon. Some really interesting things. Let's be objective. Never give up your objectivity. Never, always remember that it's human to want to hear, to want to gravitate towards what you want to hear. But you should be seeking out information and opinion from other sides so you're not in an echo chamber. As long as I am analyzing this case or any case, I will never be that echo chamber. I will always look at things from different sides. That's my nature, but it's also what I think is very important. And I give you that promise that you will always get that on this channel. You might not like it all the time, right? What was the case? Ellen, God, I can't remember her name. It's a Jewish last name. the woman in Philadelphia, whom many people believe, including people in my family, the medical examiner said she committed suicide, but there are many people that believe her fiance killed her. And I looked at the evidence, and to me, yeah, she did commit suicide. That was the most logical conclusion on it. And people got mad at me for that. So I don't claim to be an expert in that case, but just taking a look, Greenberg, thank you, Ruby. You know, pretty hard to close that door and then lock it from the outside. But also just the stabbing wounds didn't make sense to me. I haven't looked at her for a while, but she had something like 25 wounds, and the last wound was right into the heart, and that was fatal, but the rest of the wounds were shallow. And in the business, those are called exploration wounds. And I cannot picture a murderer giving her 25 shallow wounds. Her murder, I can stab myself in the back right now. Right now. I don't have a knife, but I have to keep an EpiPen around in case I have a reaction now to the medicine. I can take this and stab myself in the back, right? If I had to open it up and inject it into my back, I could do it. So it's not a problem to stab yourself in the back, especially when you're talking about just shallow wounds. However, for a big, strong guy who was strong enough to had just come from the gym and could break down that door into that room, and they're on the 6th floor, so I don't understand how he could kill her and then get out to the hallway and then lock the door from the inside. But if that guy is going to kill his girlfriend in a passion killing like that, those are going to be brutal wounds. Those are going to be deep wounds. That scene is going to be a mess. So no, those were exploration wounds. Now, but I'm always going to say it the way I see it. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying that's my analysis, but it's not popular, right? It's not what people want to hear. So that's just my nature. That's why I guess I'll probably never be able to keep 10,000 subscribers, because I'm always going to piss somebody off. I just pissed off probably several hundred people here by saying this, that I believe those were exploration wounds. Probably lost a bunch of subscribers by saying it. So I don't know. It is what it is. What are you going to do? So, but thank you very much for this. Has been a couple of years of doing live shows on this. Before the Karen Read case, I had never done a live show. I did videos that I scripted and edited and put them up there. They were a lot of work. And then I had to learn how to do live shows. So we've been through a lot together. And Tom Fleming, as my moderator and as a friend for many, many years before that, has been with me since the beginning. And then Joe has been a valuable member that's joined us since. So very much appreciate all of their work. And so the question, what we're going to do in the future, for me, I'm interested in cold cases. I like a puzzle. So something that is still unresolved. And I think that's something that for those of you there that like cold cases, like the challenge of trying to do that, and like the fact that we can bring some tiny measure of relief to families, because many times the family just feels bad that their loved one's passing murder has been forgotten, and they're just happy to have someone covered again. So that's what I would like to do, is look into those cold cases. And it now means a lot more homework, because you find a case and you got to put together all the evidence. And in some cases, it means pissing it off. So I managed to get all the evidence for the Ellen Greenberg case. I could sit down and look at all that evidence, but if I conclude what most people don't, they're all going to be mad at me. My audience will drop down again to low. But there's a lot of cases that we can look at. There's the Maura Murray case. That's another one that's sensitive. So I already did a series on that a couple years ago, so maybe I should avoid it. But there's the Susan Tankowitz case, who was found in her trunk at Logan Airport in 1992. There is the Sandra Crismo case. Maybe there's more we could do on Birchmore. I do believe that's largely solved, but there's more that can be done there because that girl was victimized by more than just Farwell. There's other cases that we can look at, and we can look at them together, and maybe we can come up with some possible new angles that bring some relief to people. But the idea, while being sensitive to the families, the idea is always to pursue the truth, to pursue it logically. That's always the highest goal, is to pursue the truth. So I'm racist. How am I racist? I hope you're talking to someone else. Someone said I'm racist. Or are they talking to someone else in chat? I don't know. That's the problem with chat. You really can get some weird things going on in chat, right? Or sometimes I can read something and misinterpret it, you know. Yeah, I mean, we can do more in the OJ case. You know, there was a lot of evidence on that. So, Susan Tankowitz, I'm probably saying the name wrong. Was your cousin? Okay. Well, if you have anything you want to discuss on that, feel free to reach out to me. It's Leitskev, LEITSKEV @gmail.com. And one of the reasons that I wanted to continue this is because there are a lot of people that reach out to me, even as the channel has been small, on these cold cases. They trust me because they know I will try to do the right thing with the information, and I won't try to exploit it. So if you have any information on that you'd like to go in it, and thank you, loyal Sox fan. All right, thank you. So feel free to reach out, and we'll find some other cases to discuss. And there is stuff still going on this case. We want to defend the families I mean, they're actually out there now going to say, all right, now we have to hunt for the real murderers. We have the real murderer. The evidence is there. And that's not the same as saying I'm blaming the prosecution. No, there's a lot more evidence and different ways that we can present it to the public if they want the truth. Frankly, a lot of them don't. But if they want the truth, maybe we can make a small difference by bringing it to them. And to some degree, that does help the families in this town that is divided and are being falsely accused. Evidence plus logic equals guilty. She did it. There's no question that Karen Reed did this. John got out of his car at 12:31 and 59 seconds. And his phone stopped moving 17 seconds later. John turned off his phone at 12:32 and 9 seconds. 7 seconds after that, John's phone moved for the last time until it was picked up the next morning. That's just one aspect of it. But it is not sane. You're not interested in the truth. That's the only way to put it. If you can look at evidence like that, not conclude that Karen did this, then you simply are not interested in the truth. And, if you're not interested in the truth, then there's nothing we can say anyways, right? We could show you a video of it happening and you wouldn't care because you're not interested in the truth. So all I can do is, we can do John Monette Ramsey. We did a little bit on that months ago. Very interesting. I picked up a couple of books on it. That's a difficult one too, because if you believe, as I do, that it was likely the family was involved in some way, that father does come after anybody and sue them very quickly. So you got to that's a tricky one. Caroline, you are not blocked. I can see you. I see you. No, what I say, the arm was not as explained as would needed to help convict, to help a jury convict beyond reasonable doubt. However, you look at the totality of the evidence, and that does actually convict beyond a reasonable doubt. All right. You have the GPS that shows that John never went in the house. Period. He just never went in the house. You have the GPS that shows they never really even stopped at the driveway. She just drove slowly to the end of the yard near the flagpole, and That was the last GPS position of his phone ever until it was picked up the next morning. So, and like I just gave you the battery temperature evidence that shows what time John got out of the car, the evidence that shows what time he turned his phone off, and the taillight evidence that shows the timeline, that there was no way to have planted it, but yet that evidence was matched to Karen's SUV. So no, the totality of the evidence shows that Karen Reed did it. And again, if you don't want to know that, it's really just because you don't want to know it. But talking to the jury is a different thing. A jury has to be convinced, like Alan Jackson said, if you think it's very likely that Karen did this, that's not enough. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And so this jury decided that some of these things added just enough doubt. But for anybody that's going up there, like I think there was the alternate juror was saying that Karen is innocent. No, you couldn't have listened to the evidence, or you just don't have a brain to process it. The evidence was so clear. And Hank Brennan put it together in a very clear way in his closing arguments. I don't know how someone could just dismiss that. And Alan Jackson, in his closing arguments, as brilliant as they were as a performance, were filled with half-truths and deception in a way that the jury shouldn't have been able to see. So, for instance, when Alan Jackson spoke about Officer Devers, he presented what she told the FBI, but it did not mention to that jury that she had subsequently learned that what she told the FBI could not have been true. So she reached to the FBI to correct it, because what she learned is that she was not within the building when the Lexus arrived. So she could not have seen Brian Higgins or Chief Berkowitz in the building with the Lexus because she herself wasn't there. So Alan Jackson neglected to tell the jury that. He also neglected to tell the jury that Officer Barrows had pretty much changed his mind once Hank Brennan showed him the Vic side by side, the taillight in the Sally Port and the taillight inside in the dash cam video taken at 8:22. And it was broken in exactly the same way. And when he saw it, he said, yeah. So Officer Barrows pretty much backed down and reversed the testimony that he was all excited to give them when he was. But Alan Jackson didn't tell the jury that. But if you were on that jury, you should have remembered it, because that testimony was only days before. So you should have realized that Alan Jackson's not telling you the truth. And that should have meant something to you. So, you know. But Texas Mom, I'm okay with your opinion on that. I'm not an expert on the case. I'm giving you my opinion based on kind of a quick analysis of it. So I'm not holding it against you that you have a different opinion than me, and I hope you won't hold it against me that that was my opinion based on a pretty quick analysis of the evidence and an but I give you the logic of my thinking, and you don't have to accept it. But at least I'm like it's like in math when you're in high school, you can't just give the answer. You got to show the work. You got to show I'm showing you the work. I'm giving you the logic of why I made that conclusion. You don't have to agree with it. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, I think it's maybe equally valuable if I just give you the work. I show you the homework. I give you the logic. And you don't agree with it, but you say, all right, that's an interesting point of view to use that kind of logic. And maybe you still find it interesting, right? Or maybe you still find that it might help you in some other case. So, or maybe not. That's okay. I can respect that, but hopefully it does. So, all right. Been on a long time. Back is definitely hurting me. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. And we'll be doing some cold cases again soon. I know Jen Coffenaffer is interested in it, and Margaret is very interested in it. I think Kate needs a little break from true crime, but I'll still be talking to her every day. So if there's a case that interests her, I'll try to bring her in, and we'll see where it goes. All right, guys, thank you very much, and thank you for being with us the last couple of years.